Hello and welcome to the True Hope Cast podcast, where we take a deep dive into mental health's many physiological and psychological aspects. This is the show for you if you're looking for motivation, inspiration, knowledge and solutions, and that's what we are all about here at True Hope Canada. And True Hope Canada is a mind and body based supplement company dedicated first and foremost to promoting brain and body health through non-invasive nutritional means. For more information about us, you can visit truehopecanada.com. Today on the show, we're going to be discussing nervous system biology and trauma healing. We're going to be discussing that with Michelle Brown. Michelle is a functional nutrition and lifestyle practitioner, a clinical herbalist, and she holds a master's certificate in biology of trauma. She works with clients from all around the world addressing anxiety, depression, fatigue, and other chronic health issues from a root cause perspective. This approach addresses nervous system dysregulation and emphasizes the mind-body connection. This allows true healing to happen. Enjoy the show. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to True Hope Cast. Thank you so much for being with us today. How are you and what is going well?
I am doing well. Thank you, Simon. I'm so excited to be here.
Wonderful. Yeah, I really appreciate the time. And we're just talking just off air about how many incredible trauma practitioners there are in the world right now, and how this is such a real, I don't want to use the word buzz or trend, but a massive necessary thing within the market of healthcare, and especially mental health care. So it's wonderful that we've been able to connect and get you on the show. And we're going to be discussing nervous system biology and trauma healing today. And at the end of the podcast, what we're going to do, we're going to offer some solutions to the question, what are some daily practices that can help people connect their mind and body better? Kind of like right away, like something they can put into practice immediately. So we'll cover that towards the end of the show. But if you wouldn't mind just kicking off with a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure, I'd love to. Well, I'm Michelle, and I am a clinical herbalist, a functional nutrition counselor, and a trauma-informed provider. I have training as a mastery level biology of trauma professional, and it was in that training that I really began to understand this role of trauma and how it impacts our overall health. I work with a lot of clients with mood challenges, right? Anxiety, depression, and other chronic health issues, right? That sometimes are difficult to unravel and resolve. And sometimes I'm working with clients who are doing a lot of really good things for their health, but they're still stuck, right? They're still stuck in a place of not really moving forward and getting better. And when I started recognizing and understanding what trauma was and how it was impacting the health of my clients, my own health, that, it really was a light bulb for me, and how these things impact our health and our nervous system and our ability to feel good and safe and connected and move forward with our health. So yeah, really exciting stuff going on in the world of trauma healing these days.
Wonderful. Yeah, you mentioned the word stuck on your website, which I was checking out today and yesterday. And yeah, that's a really interesting area that people find themselves in so many different walks of life, but especially around, like, even if they are doing such great things for their body, their spirit, etc., and their emotional health, but being stuck at a point where it's like unable to progress to the next bit. And that's where a lot of your work will come in, and we'll certainly talk about that, especially around the subconscious mind and like deep rooted traumas and root cause and things like that. But I just wanted to get your kind of definition, I guess, of like, what is trauma and why is it such a hot, big topic at the moment?
Yes, I think it's a great question because, I think a lot of people misunderstand what trauma even is. We often think trauma is this thing that happened to me, this event, right? I was assaulted or abused, or I went through an accident, right? And these things were trauma. And yet it's really not about the event. It's about our experience going through the event. And that's a really profound difference in looking at what trauma is, because that means that what might be a trauma for you might not be for me, right? We all have a different experience going through the different things that would come up in our life, and what impacts our experience of what something is in terms of it being a trauma or not is really found in the role of our nervous system and our ability to handle the things that come at us, the stress, the overwhelm. And if something is too much for our body to handle, instead of going into a fight or flight response of the nervous system, we go into collapse, we go into freeze, we go into overwhelm, which is really a nervous system response that we also call the trauma response. And it's really profound to start understanding the role of the nervous system in trauma because it explains why we do the things we do when we feel overwhelmed. We were talking about that feeling of being stuck, right? And for so many people, even if they're doing some good things to move forward with their health. Maybe they're trying to change their diet or doing supplements or, other lifestyle practices. And yet it seems like things won't shift for them. Then they find that it's often because their nervous system is stuck in this dorsal vagal freeze response that's keeping them from moving forward. And it's happening, at this biological level. And I think that trauma has become such a big topic because we're recognizing that it's something we've all experienced, right? I have so many clients who, they always thought trauma was that big, terrible thing that happened to other people. And then when they start recognizing what trauma really is, like they have this profound realization that they've experienced trauma. They've experienced this place of feeling overwhelmed, unable to move forward. And it can become a chronic pattern for many people. And so starting to recognize that and this other state of the nervous system that I think for a long time wasn't even understood is, just giving voice to what so many people have experienced that they didn't, understand what was going on. They didn't have the words or the, framework to put into words what was happening. And when you understand this, it's like, it's a relief, right? It's like I understand what's happening in my body and why I might be reacting to situations or people or whatever's coming up in my life in a very certain way that I didn't understand about myself before.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you very much. I think the understanding aspect of all of that and understanding just the basics of how our nervous system reacts in the world and how it functions and how, I suppose, how it was deliberately meant to function 100,000 years ago in comparison to today, and how it's not that much different. I just kind of think back to my science classes in school and even high school. I don't really remember much of that. I didn't really school wasn't my thing, but I went back to school when I was 30 years old, and then I was absolutely fascinated with the structure of all of the bodily systems, especially our neurological system. But I was more fascinated with the pathophysiology about when things went wrong, which is way more interesting than like when the structure of like when things are supposed to be right, because so many people have got these disruptions and dysregulations, and we've got this wonderful and incredible supercomputer that just sometimes just doesn't quite work. So that I found that a lot more interesting, but I didn't learn that until I was 30 years old, and I had to get really motivated to do that and to do some like further advanced education. But so many people sitting around today, like listening to this podcast, they might not know just the basics of how our nervous system works. And if you're unable to recognize that, then how would you be able to recognize stress, depression, anxiety, PTSD, all of these things that happen to so many people on a daily basis, and people end up living with these things for decades, and it becomes a huge part of their lives and their personalities. If we don't understand the basic function of how our body's working, especially our brain, it's very, very difficult to get to a place where we are going to start actually healing and going forward. I think it's actually kind of impossible. If you don't understand like really the function of it, then you're never going to be able to get to a point where you are, really, I suppose, digesting the experience that you had before. So would you mind maybe explaining to us a little bit? You don't have to go too deep, but you've said some really cool words in regards to like polyvagal theory I don't think many people are going to know what that is. So if we can step that back a little bit and maybe build up towards what that might be,
Sure.
can you mind explaining a little bit about like what the nervous system is and kind of what it does in response to trauma and stress?
Absolutely. Yeah. And this understanding is so important, like you said, because when we understand what's happening in the body, why our body and our mind are responding to situations the way they are, I find it's actually really freeing. Like we can go, oh, look at that. There's my freeze response kicking in response to this overwhelm. And we don't have to bring in that guilt and shame that we often feel about maybe reaching for unhealthy coping mechanisms, or just, when we're in freeze, it's a very low energy state. We're often checked out, right? And so I find ourselves laying on the couch, feeling unable to get up and, thinking like, why am I doing this? What's wrong with me? And really it's a nervous system response that's happening that's, driving this behavior. So if we're thinking about the nervous system, its job number one is to keep us safe, right? We want to be safe in our environment, in our body. And like you said, going back to years and years of our ancestors who were, hunter gatherers out in the wilderness, maybe hunting, looking out for the tiger jumping out behind them. They had to constantly be aware of their environment and whether or not they were safe, right? And yet, we tend not to live that way anymore, where we're worried about, the big bad bear coming to get us. But our nervous system is, yeah, you're right. It hasn't changed in all of these millennia of human existence, where we still are looking for this sense of safety primarily in our body. And so we think of the nervous system, and there are three really responses of the nervous system. And the one we all want to be in is that parasympathetic response, right? That rest and digest part of the nervous system, where we feel calm and yet we are, alert and active and engaged with life, right? We feel good and we're able to connect socially. All of these things we feel and experience when we're in that part of our nervous system. And then we usually all understand the stress response, right? The sympathetic activation of the nervous system, which we call that fight or flight, right? That's where the tiger jumps out and we need to run, right? And so, again, most of us aren't being chased by tigers, but on a daily basis, we have different stressors that are kicking on this sympathetic response of the nervous system. And when that becomes chronic, right, we just can stay in this sympathetic activation. And it's really important to note that things are happening at a cellular level, right, at a biological level in our body, depending on the state of our nervous system. And, there's different hormones that kick in when we're stressed out, like adrenaline and cortisol. And if we are overwhelmed by stressors, anything that we are overwhelmed by, something that's too much for too long, or it can be too little, right? Too little for too long. We don't have the internal resources we need to fight, to flee, right? In terms of that sympathetic response. That's when the nervous system goes into this dorsal vagal response of the nervous system, which is known as the freeze response or trauma response. And when I say dorsal vagal, we're really referring to this nerve that runs from the brain and it wanders through the body. Vagus really means wandering. And this wandering nerve has different branches. So when we're in a fight or flight response, right, it's a different part of that vagus nerve that is turned on and accessed than when we're in a freeze response. And because this nerve wanders through the body, it's connected to our digestive system, to our organs, right? To a lot of different things happening in the body. If we're not in that rest and digest part of our nervous system, that nerve crosstalk between the brain and the digestive system, for example, isn't functioning adequately. Well, that's where I tend to see a lot of people with digestive issues who are stuck in, either a sympathetic response or a chronic freeze response. Or what's often happening is we're kind of bouncing around between these different states of the nervous system, which is really hard on the body because, again, we're shifting into different hormonal patterns, cellular patterns, and can cause a lot of just metabolic chaos at that level. And so, we want to have a nervous system that has some flexibility to it, right? So that if we're sitting here having a conversation, and this is a example I use a lot because this actually happened to me once, where I was in a conversation like this, and the smoke detector went off in my house. And I think one of my kids was making something, and I don't know, a little smoke happened, and there all of a sudden the alarm's going off. And my reaction was, to kind of jump, and my eyes got big, and I jumped up and ran into the other room, right? That's that sympathetic response kicking in. You turned off the fire alarm, everything was okay, but I could feel my heart rate, speeding up. My breathing was faster. And so everything was fine. I was able to come sit back down, get back into my meeting. People I was talking with just kind of laughed at me. And I was able to kind of bring my nervous system back after a few minutes to a place of parasympathetic response, right? Where I was okay. I moved through that stressor successfully. But for people stuck in a chronic freeze response or this dysregulation of the nervous system, I mean, something like that could cause them to feel completely overwhelmed, right? They can't even come back down into a parasympathetic state and calm their system down. These are my clients who are so overwhelmed by little stressors that they just can't get off the couch for the rest of the day. They're not moving forward in life successfully on a day-to-day basis. So really helpful to understand what's happening in our nervous system, and then start recognizing the state your nervous system is in throughout the day, because each of these states requires a different approach to help us move through it successfully and back into that parasympathetic response.
Beautiful. Well said. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. I think that example that you just gave about the fire alarm coming off, and you go into a fight or flight, and then you're able to regulate yourself back into a normal conversation, back into your norm. Yeah, being able to have that capacity within your nervous system to be able to fluctuate, I want to say safely, with the ability to get into a stress response, because that situation you said there, that could have been it could have been a fire, it could have been really, really serious, and you do need to have all of your energy, all of your blood in your extremities, and eyes wide open, etc., to be able to deal with that situation in a very quick manner. But 9 times out of 10, those situations don't turn into, let's say, emergency situations. But the ability to be able to, whether that's innate or through tools that you may use, to be able to bring yourself back down is so, so valuable. And I feel that that's an innate ability that we've lost as a species, primarily, that it's a sense that we don't really have anymore. And we need to understand that a little bit better, get a little bit more connected with our body and our mind on a more conscious daily basis, to be able to actually recognize what's going on for us. Because a lot of people are kind of severed from the neck up in regards to like what they're actually feeling, whether that might be pain, discomfort, etc., these messages that come from the body. So yeah, that nervous system capacity, that ability to kind of fluctuate, it's kind of like having really good heart rate variability, where if you want to go out and do a workout, you can do that. Your heart can go up there and be in this zone, but then it can easily kind of get you back down here again. It's very, very similar in regards to that, being able to have that flexibility. And that explanation that you gave about the nervous system, wonderful. And I think that's a really important key start for people to start with, that very simple understanding, to then go forward into individual complexity within everyone's certain case, whether it may be from something that happened to them 20, 30 years ago or something a year ago. Everyone's case is very individual. One person's response to one thing is not going to be the same as another person. So that's why it's so valuable to work with a practitioner one-on-one, so you can actually dive deep into your individual circumstances. That's something that the conventional model with like, let's just use drugs for example, it's such a poor approach to something that's so specific and unique, that actually needs investigation, it needs understanding, it needs empathy, and it needs space and time to be able to get to that root cause. And that's what really kind of annoys me about a conventional model towards like mental health. Or it's just that you're it's just a chemical imbalance, or it's just this, or it's just that. But we can fix that with with taking something external that you'd have to be on forever to fix that problem. Really annoys me about the conventional model for that. And I wanted to ask you, like, what's a typical patient pathway that comes towards you? Are they somebody that's been within the conventional model for a long time, and they're looking for an alternative route towards their like chronic conditions, or are people coming to you before they even jump to a doctor, or jump into drugs? What does that look like?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I have some clients who are on medications for mood and a lot that aren't. A lot of the clients I work with are, they're looking for a more natural approach. They recognize that, medications aren't really solving the underlying issues that they're dealing with in terms of their mood. And, so they're looking to either stay off of medications if they haven't started, or often working to get off of medications in many cases. And it's really coming to me at that point of starting to understand, like, oh, there's more happening in my body than just, this lack of medication, right? And that this isn't really going to fix the problem. It's really about understanding what's happening in their body, in their nervous system. And you mentioned, that disconnection people often have when they've been through trauma, in terms of disconnecting from the body. That's really common.
Hmm.
When we have trauma, we feel it in our body, we store it in our body, right? And so that can be a really uncomfortable sensation. So these coping mechanisms that we often turn to, whether it's food or alcohol, or, I'll even put mood medications in that category, just in the sense that there's something we reach for in order to kind of turn off that feeling we're having in our
Hmm.
body that's so uncomfortable, to disconnect to the point where we can dissociate from what's happening in the body. But it's when we really start to notice what we're actually feeling and experiencing in the body, and then working with that with like somatic tools, for example, different, I like to call mind body practices, and then addressing the nervous system biology. I've really seen those two pieces, when we bring them together, really shift the overwhelm, the anxiety, the oppression that many of the clients who come to me are struggling with.
Yeah, I mean, you must have so many people. You probably see lots of people who clearly do have this disconnect within their mind and body. And you mentioned some practices and tools there. Is there we're going to talk about this at the end of the show as well, but is there something that people can do kind of quickly to actually start talking to their body again?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a little bit of just noticing, first of all, like just noticing what's happening in your body. And, I'll share a short little story with you, if that's okay, of my
Sure.
own experience with this. When I was first kind of starting to understand this nervous system piece, I was already a health coach, and, I was helping people with their diet and, nutrition and supplements. And yet it's funny, I would have clients who would come to me who, knew they had trauma. They would tell me about trauma. And these were often the clients who were really stuck. And sometimes I didn't know what to kind of do next to help them. And it really wasn't until I learned how to start working with the nervous system and my own nervous system that I started to see a profound shift with the clients I was working with. And so, when I was a teenager, I struggled with eating disorders. That was the 90s, and, fat was bad, and thin was in, all of those things. And so I was avoiding food. I started restricting my eating. And it wasn't until, honestly, years and years later, that I recognized that that was a trauma response for me. It was at a time when a family member was diagnosed with cancer, my mom's only sister, and like things were really stressful in my home. Like, I think my parents didn't know how to deal with that stress themselves. I think my parents are great people, but they just honestly kind of checked out at that time. And
Hmm.
in my sense of overwhelm and not sure what to do, that was the only thing I had control over, right? Was food. So that's what I restricted, and until it became, this full blown eating disorder that really felt out of control. And, I was eventually able to do some things to move past that. But then years later, in my late 30s, I found myself going through divorce. And I had moved to a new town with my three kids, a new home, I was working full time. And, it was a really stressful time. And I found myself putting my kids to bed in the evening, and then I was going in the kitchen and grabbing a jar of peanut butter and chocolate chips and eating. And
Mhm.
and in my head, I'm like, what am I doing? I need to stop this. And it felt really out of control, which felt really scary. And at that time, it was right when I started working with the nervous system response. I was actually working with another practitioner who taught me how to feel what I was feeling. And so, like she said, if we feel true hunger, just thinking about where we feel that out, we often feel, this kind of rumbling in our belly, this, kind of tightness as we feel those hunger pains. And yet, if we think about another emotion like anxiety, for example, we feel that in our body. We say anxiety like it's an emotion we have in our head or a thought, but we actually feel something in our body. And for many of us, putting my hands here on my chest, because for me, that's where I feel it, right? It's like this pressure, something pushing down on my chest, that tightness, tension. Maybe something like anger, we can feel like a tension in the back of the neck or the head. So, as I started to notice what I was feeling, the next time I went into the kitchen in the evening and started to reach for that jar of peanut butter, I just stopped and noticed, what am I feeling in my body right now? And it was just like a light bulb. It was this huge epiphany. It sounds so simple, but I realized I was not hungry. I was feeling this intense pressure on my chest, right? This anxiety. And it was so profound for me at that moment. It was like the first time I'd actually felt my feelings, which sounds almost ridiculous to be almost 40
Mhm.
and say that was the first time, but that was my disconnect from what I was feeling, right? My dissociation from my body. And as I recognized that and then began to work on my nervous system biology at the same time, I was able to shift out of that pattern of needing to reach for food to calm my nervous system, bring in some healthier, coping mechanisms, and live from more of a place of parasympathetic response. So that's where I would start, just noticing, what do you feel in your body? It may be discomfort, it may be an uncomfortable thing you're experiencing, but until you start to notice it, you can't really change it, right? And so think about where maybe you feel different things that come up for you: anxiety, anger, guilt, joy, hunger, these different sensations, and start noticing where you're feeling them, how you're feeling them in your body.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's so common for people to spend the majority of their day um, unconscious and really aware of like what's going on for them in the present moment. It's about getting the kids to school, getting them fed. I mean, I've got two young kids as well, so I kind of know what that's like. It's difficult to be in the present moment, and sometimes it's 8 p.m. when they're finally asleep. You can actually breathe, and then your brain and your body start to like connect again. And I guess for a lot of people, that can be a very emotional point because you've just been living kind of out of your mind really for the majority of the day, and then you finally bring it all in. And you have so many people in my nutrition practice where 8 p.m., 9 p.m. would be like when they thought they were getting super, super hungry. For a lot of people, they would be because they're so stressed about all the other things they need to do that they're just not eating during the day. And your body finally kind of like relaxes somewhat from this really high stress state during the day. And then that's kind of like when everything comes flooding in, and it's a lot easier to hit the fridge and kind of take care of that caloric situation late at night when you don't have like kids and things to juggle around. So I totally understand the struggle that people experience with that. But I think, yeah, you beautifully explained that if you're able to actually recognize where that hunger is coming from, where that maybe anxiety is coming from, and is it attached to something a little bit more emotionally in depth, or is it actually hunger, or is it actually another sensation? Perhaps maybe tomorrow you need to maybe prepare some food and take care of that throughout the day. So really very quite simple steps, but being able to put yourself more consistently in a state of being in the present moment is so key. And it's so hard for a lot of people, especially in this culture where it's just like we have to be so busy, we have to have activities all of the time. We don't really have this space and time where it's like, okay, 1 o'clock every day, like you commit to 5 minutes of just like sitting down and breathing and like regulating yourself. We're all just like so up here all of the time. So it's something that we have lost within our natural culture and our natural biology, that we would now in 2024, we have to look back thousands of years to ancient practices that already figured this out, and we have to start bringing them back into our lives. And it's super interesting. These things come in full circle. But I know people now who meditate in yoga, and it's like they can't not have that in their lives anymore, because it's their therapy. It's their space where they're able to reconnect with their body and give it what it needs, and just give it the attention and finally throughout that day bring energy towards them, rather than kind of giving it away constantly throughout the day for all these things. So yeah, that's wonderful. And you talk about nervous system biology a lot. Can you explain to us a little bit more about like what that is, and what it has to do with addressing things like anxiety, depression, overwhelm, etc.?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. When I think of nervous system biology, it's really what we've been talking about, right? Like we know when, or whatever state our nervous system is in, there's something happening at a cellular physiological level. When we're stressed, we're releasing adrenaline or cortisol, for example. These are hormones that impact a lot of other things that are happening in our body. And for example, cortisol is considered a catabolic hormone. It means it's a hormone that causes breakdown of tissue. So over time, if we're stuck in a sympathetic stress state, what you just mentioned, where a lot of people are really staying up in their sympathetic response just to try to get through life, right? They're in survival mode. That's how they get through their day, right? They just keep pushing and using that sympathetic response, that cortisol, to get through their day. And yet that's making things change at a cellular level, at the level of our organ systems. And we also know that with trauma, it changes our biology. So there's a lot of research that's been done on adverse childhood events, right? And chronic health conditions. So someone with adverse childhood events, which can actually be measured, right, on an assessment that has been put together by Dr. Vincent Felitti. And the higher your score, your what we call ACEs score, the more prone that people are to things like autoimmune conditions or chronic inflammatory conditions like cardiovascular health issues and depression, anxiety, all of these things. And so, we know there's a link between trauma and what's happening with our health and our biology. And then it goes the other way as well. Like if we aren't well resourced in our internal just nutrients, right, our biology, then we're going to be more susceptible to stress and overwhelm. And so I found this to be a really key piece, because a lot of clients who come to me, they are low in key nutrients that impact their nervous system biology and their mood. And I look at things like copper zinc balance. I look at things like methylation. I look at their neurotransmitter function, right? If we're low in neurotransmitters, which are our feel-good hormones in the brain, chemical messengers that transmit to us that we're safe, we're in a good place, we can be in a good mood. If we're low in these neurotransmitters, that's going to show up in our mood or in our level of anxiety and overwhelm. And so by working on this biology side of things, we can resource that nervous system, right? We talked about how the trauma response is really a place of being unresourced in our nervous system, right? Things that are too much for too quickly or too much for too long. And that can just be, if we're deficient in zinc, we can be experiencing anxiety, depression, overwhelm. And so looking at that biology side of things, where can we bring in some support and resource that nervous system so that we have more capacity to handle the stress and the overwhelm that comes up in our day-to-day lives?
Beautiful. Yeah, I've always been so fascinated with the microbiome and gut health and its connection to the brain and to disorders like anxiety and depression. And it just makes such perfect sense when you think about if you're predominantly in a stress state, and it doesn't mean you have to be like, freaking out, running around all the time. You can be in this like base level stress state, which people kind of literally wake up in, and they go to bed with it. And they're never in a rest and digest situation. So constantly all out through the day, their energy, their blood, then their chi, whatever you want to call it, is never really in their digestive tract. It's always in their extremities. It's always elsewhere because the body thinks that it's under threat constantly. So the ability to break down your food correctly and obtain the nutrients from it is so difficult for, I want to say, most people out there walking around today. So therefore, eventually at some point the body is just going to be in this state of lack, and this chronic state of lack, which will lead to some sort of disorder down the road, whether that's an autoimmune disorder, gut disorder, neurological disorder. Everything can kind of be linked back to the gut, nutrient deficiency, depletion. And it just goes to show how like vital it is to obviously not only have great practices around food, like actually treating your meals like a kind of meditative practice where you're actually like, you're conscious, you're aware, you're not distracted, you're chewing your food properly, and you're eating the right things for you. But it just goes to show how vital it is to consume good quality nutrition, even from the beginning states of when you are in a stress state and you want to get yourself away from that and you want to work with someone like yourself. How vital it is to have the right nutrients within your body to begin making new neurological connections within your brain, and to correctly facilitate the use of amino acids and vitamins and minerals and all these things. And since I've been working with True Hope Canada, and our flagship product is a broad spectrum micronutrient formula that especially our minerals are treated with very, very unique care. The majority of products out there with the minerals, they spend about 4 hours on the chelation of the minerals, but we spend 4 days on it. We have a very special process in which we do that. So minerals that in our product are actually obtained through the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain very, very quickly. So we see and we hear, I hear through the social media and through the website and emails, etc. I hear daily of people kind of having a dark cloud over their minds, and then it's lifted literally within days. And that's just from taking a good quality nutrition product that's actually giving people the ability to kind of see the light a little bit. And then they're able to step into a life where they're actually thinking about like, maybe cooking a good meal, or going to a yoga class, or just going for a walk around the block, or they just reduce the like depressive and anxious thoughts that come into their mind. So it just goes to show how important that basic understanding of their neurology, as well as the basic importance of nutrition at the same time, and how if they're not taken care of for long periods of time, we are going to see what we see already in our world, an absolute epidemic of sickness, autoimmune disease, etc. And it's really, especially mental health as well, it's really sad to see, because there are some really powerful solutions out there that actually avoid the conventional side, give people their actual power back and responsibility back to take care of these things themselves. And it's really, really empowering to be able to do that, and to know that you've got the tools available to you to reverse 20 years of pain.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when we fix that biology. Nutrients are such a big part of that. Sometimes there are biochemical imbalances that can even be genetic, that can impact our nutrient level. So, for instance, like pyroluria is something I screen for with my clients, where basically they're excreting zinc and vitamin B6 in the urine due to this condition of pyroluria. And, so there are specific things that can be tested for, but, just a general, like bringing in nutrients, minerals, those amino acids you mentioned, we make our neurotransmitters from amino acids. So I'm always starting with those basics of like, just how are we eating, right? Are we getting enough protein, minerals, fiber? Yes, to fix the microbiome and feed our good bacteria in the gut. So there's so much we can do with nutrition to really help support someone's mental health and mood.
Yeah, so Empower Plus has got 35 peer-reviewed journals, independently funded, and some of the original work was done on bipolar disorder. And Dr. Bonnie Kaplan, the lead researcher on this, I won't forget the news clip that she was on for, I think it was Discovery Health, that did a documentary on it. But anyway, she's explaining that, there are a lot of people out there that just have this genetic disposition. They just need more minerals and more vitamins than like the average person. And if you look at our soil and our food at the moment and how depleted it gets year after year, you just by understanding that, you can understand that the rise of these disorders is just going to get higher and higher and higher if people are not taking care of that with good gut health and avoiding avoiding poor foods, especially sugar and poor fats, it's going to really make a massive impact. And consuming a really good micronutrient formula can really transform a lot of people's lives very quickly. So yeah, it's a fully rounded approach that people have to take. And working with individuals like yourself and like nutritionists, acupuncturists, there's some really amazing practitioners out there. A lot of them we've had on the show, just to express and tell people and explain to people that, first of all, you're not alone in what's going on. Two, that there are wonderful options for you to be able to get yourself out of, what will seem like a very dark, difficult place. And we have wonderful communities out there that can help get people through these things. So yeah, it's a wonderful time to be alive, and it's wonderful that we can actually have these conversations and share the knowledge of individuals like yourself to give people hope. And that's kind of like what we're all about here at True Hope Canada. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about trauma informed approach and what that looks like in a like one-on-one setting.
Yeah. So when I'm working with clients who, generally know that there's a trauma response playing a role in their health most of the time, I think it's helpful if they understand what's happening in their nervous system. So if they don't already have some understanding, I start by just doing some education, right? Explaining what we've talked about today, how their nervous system is playing a role in whatever, health symptoms or issues with their mood they might be experiencing. And again, I think it's really freeing to understand that, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, your body's doing what it needed to do to keep you feeling safe and from going into overwhelm. And so when we understand that, I think it's really freeing. Can release some of that guilt and shame we often feel around whatever we're dealing with, whether it's reaching for unhealthy coping mechanisms or just not being able to move forward with our health and feeling stuck. And so, I bring in some assessments with my clients to just have a better understanding of what's going on with them. I assess neurotransmitter function. I look at serotonin, dopamine, GABA, endorphins. And then, after assessing these, it's really interesting how there's sort of a constellation of symptoms around each of these different neurotransmitters. And so for someone with low GABA, right, they might be experiencing anxiety as well as kind of that inner and actually kind of outer tension, like muscle tension in their body. And maybe they find like reaching for caffeine and food, right, for a pick me up, just for energy can be part of that. And so if I assess that, I might bring in some just gentle support there with amino acids just to get them to a better baseline with their mood. And, while we're working on kind of these underlying pieces, which might be the biochemical imbalances, pyroluria is something I look at. I look at methylation issues. I assess for copper excess and, of course, looking at gut health, nutrition, it's kind of general nutrition. Are they eating well? But like you mentioned, someone with, low mood symptoms, low neurotransmitters, they may be really struggling to like just find the energy and the motivation to get into the kitchen and make a healthy meal. So by supporting some of these things, we can find more of that internal motivation to do the things we know will help us feel better. And then the other side of that is the body-based approach, right? Where I bring in specific mind-body tools to help my clients start recognizing what they're feeling and experiencing in their body. And then there are so many tools, of course, that we can bring in to shift that. We want to bring that body back into a state of feeling safe and supported. And so somatic tools or different mind-body practices, you mentioned yoga in some cases can be helpful, but we have to really be able to understand what's happening in our body before those tools are really helpful and valuable. Because if we don't really connect with what's happening in our body, we won't be able to notice the shift that those tools bring in when we try to do some of these things. So important to start recognizing the state of that nervous system, working with the body, bringing in tools to shift into that state of feeling safe and supported, and then working on that biology side. So, internally, we're more resourced and able to handle the things that come at us.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think again, like building on the the education piece about the nervous system, and then discussing things like neurotransmitters and how your body can only really manufacture from what you provide it through nutrition. So yeah, if you are depleted in amino acids or proteins, for example, your body's going to struggle to make neurotransmitters, and your neurons are not going to be able to communicate as well. So it's very, very important, that educational piece. And I'm sure there are wonderful podcast, books, even online courses that people can indulge in, that can start at really, really basic understanding levels, which is a really perfect place to start, to actually really begin to understand how your body works. I've not been in school for a long period of time, but I wonder how that's kind of changed in regards to helping people. That's the beginning of helping children understand their emotions, and how they can come up for them in very, very difficult times within adolescence. I think it'd be a really, really great piece to be able to help those kids through that, to understand why they may be feeling like they are, and giving them some options and tools to be able to actually practically help them through that. I think we're actually building a little bit more of a culture where parents are maybe understanding that a little bit more, and there's a lot of information out there in how to actually help your children understand how they are feeling. I feel like that's definitely different from like my generation and my parents, who certainly did the best that they could with the tools that they were given, but it wasn't really, especially the emotional piece around, like, even like young boys, you weren't supposed to like feel your emotions. You're supposed to like lock them up and not let them feel. Like, I just imagine like what that's done to generations of men out there. But I feel like that the tide is a little bit shifting in regards to like how we do that. So that's really good news. And we also have wonderful tools at our disposal to be able to support parents, to support their kids, and hopefully create a different generation of people. We'll see. But I want to finish off by clarifying the question we asked at the top of the show, which was, what are some daily practices that can help me connect my mind and body in a better way? And you've talked about a few of them already. I'd love you if you could express maybe some that, maybe if people have got no experience of yoga or meditation or breath work, what could they do that's like a really entry level way of being able to connect themselves?
Yeah, great question. So, these can be really simple practices you can start bringing into your day to day life that will help you just start connecting with what's happening in your body and what you're feeling. And so, I use some somatic practices where, just a somatic experiencing type of practices where we're just noticing and then working with the body to create that sense of safety. And one of the ones I like to start with is really simple. It's something called orienting. And basically, we're just orienting to our environment we're in. So, as I'm sitting here at my desk having this conversation with you, Simon, I'm just going to take a moment and as you're listening, I invite you to do this as well. But just look around the space that you're in. You can look up at the ceiling. You can look behind you and to the side, right? We're telling our nervous system we're safe when we do that. We're creating a sense of safety, right? There's no tiger behind me going to jump out. And so it's just taking a moment to pause. And I notice when I do this that I just sort of stop and notice even my body. And like, as I'm often in meetings, I might find myself holding tension, right, in certain areas of my body that because I'm in my head, having a conversation, I'm not really noticing until I stop and kind of orient what's around me,
Hmm.
just notice what I'm feeling in my body. And then I can shift that. And anytime you're working with any type of mind body practice, somatic tool, yoga, whatever you're using, it's really valuable to just take a moment to stop. That pause is so valuable. Before maybe you sit down to eat a meal, you could try orienting and then just notice, what do you notice happening in your body? And often people will say, well, I feel a little more relaxed. But what I want to know is, okay, well, how do you know you feel more relaxed? Like, where do you feel it in your body, right? We might notice our shoulders soften and drop a little bit, a little softening in the belly, right? We let go of just a little degree or two of tension there. Or, maybe we hold tension in our hands and kind of keep our hands clenched. Do we notice we let that go a little bit. And so, really being able to connect to what's happening in the body and then building in tools that can help us shift these patterns where we might hold tension is a really helpful way to just start working with our nervous system response and understanding what we're feeling. Because a lot of this tension we hold is what's creating this sense of anxiety in the body. And so as we notice that and are able to let it go, we'll notice a shift in our mood, which is really powerful.
Perfect. That's a perfect example of something that somebody can do like right away to really start reconnecting with themselves and help, yeah, melt away a lot of that tension that kind of just like it's energy, it sits there and you've got the ability to can move that through. So that's wonderful. What a great recommendation. Thank you so much. Can you let us know where people can connect with you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me online. My website is botanicea.com. I'm on Instagram. You'll find me on YouTube as well. And, I'm sure, Simon, you can share those links with your audience. But yeah, I'd love to connect with anyone who wants to know more about working with their nervous system biology to support their mood and health.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll absolutely make sure that all those links are in the show notes so people can connect with your YouTube channel, social media, etc. So, Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the show. What I really loved about this episode today was the understanding of the basics of the brain and what we're working with when it comes to anxiety, stress, and the fight or flight sympathetic response. I think so many people have heard a lot of these words, but to actually like to build that kind of from the ground up and have a real foundational understanding will really give people the ability to connect what's going on with their body, their minds, and like what they're exhibiting in regards to emotions. So I really appreciate you coming on and explaining that in such beautiful ways. I really thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, that is it for this episode of True Hope Cast, the official podcast of True Hope Canada. You can leave us a review on iTunes and a star review on Spotify as well if you've got the time. But that's it for this week. We'll see you soon.